So, as has been said, I am currently dressed as a man who would have been living in a seaside town in New England in the 1770s. So, I will quickly take you through all of what I'm wearing right now, and I'll tell you about some different wardrobe options that were available for men in 1770s for different lifestyles. So, what I'm wearing now is very much working wear that is definitely influenced by sailors. So I'll just go through piece by piece. The sort of underwear of the 18th century, since there wasn't a specific underwear garment back then, is a shirt, which is essentially just a large square of fabric that is sewn together with sleeves. It's very loose, very baggy, and in some cases goes all the way down to the knee. So it is the underwear. It's also the pajamas of the 18th century. This is what you sleep in. This is what you're wearing all the time. The one I'm wearing, I don't know if you'll be able to see it because it's just sort of sticking out over my handkerchief here, but it is a blue and white checked fabric. This was common for working people in the 18th century. Higher class and for different situations, people might tend to wear white shirts, as this is presenting a more clean appearance, but the checked shirt can take more dirt without showing it. So it is very good for working wear. And a lot of more upper class shirts also have ruffles at the chest and also at the sleeves. Mine does not have that, as it is, again, more working wear. Shirts in the 18th century were frequently made out of different types of linen. Linen in the 18th century can mean a couple of different things. In modern times, it mostly just means fabric that's made of flax. In the 18th century, it can also refer to fabric that's made of hemp. So there are multiple varieties of linen that were used for shirts, and then there were also some that were made of cotton, some that were made of wool, or blends of different fibers. There were many options available. The one I'm wearing right now is a blue and white cotton check. Then on my feet, I'm wearing just some plain woolen socks. Frequently, if you are wearing breeches, which I'll get to in a bit, but if you're wearing breeches, you would be wearing thigh-high stockings that could be made of wool, they could be made of linen, they could be made of silk. But since I am wearing trousers, I just have some short socks that are made of a gray wool, which would be fairly cheap. And then for more visible clothing, I'm wearing a blue wool jacket. This is very much of the fashion that would be worn by sailors. So again, this is something that someone in a seaside town might wear while they're working. It is very plain, it just has plain pewter buttons on it. And it is also cut straight across the waist, which is not the common fashion for most clothing in the 18th century, which again, I'll get to very shortly. Around my neck, I am wearing a printed cotton handkerchief. There are multiple different varieties of neckwear that men in the 18th century might have to hold the shirt collar up and stiffen around the neck. And printed cotton handkerchiefs were definitely a common option. You could also have a cravat, which is a long strip of fabric that you would wrap around and tie in the front, or a neck stock, which could be a bit of fabric that was gathered very small and then clasped in the back. Then on my legs, I am wearing, as I said, a pair of trousers. These are very much in existence in the 18th century, but they are not particularly fashionable. Trousers in the 18th century are very much working wear. They were worn by sailors and common laborers and things like that. They would frequently be made of very heavy linen. These ones are very heavy canvas, but they could also be made of wool. And they are very much everyday workwear. They're not particularly fancy. And another option for workwear that you see quite frequently in the 18th century are breeches that are made of leather. So this is the one main bit of leather clothing that you see in the 18th century. You don't really have jackets or anything like that made out of leather. I believe they do exist, but not particularly frequently. But leather breeches are very common because they take a lot more wear than the fabric ones do. So they hold up under stress. And also, people who are riding horses frequently would also wear leather breeches because, again, they hold up much better. So And then on my head, I am wearing a plain linen cap. This is, in the 18th century, you would always want to have your head covered, but you wouldn't want to be dirtying something like this felt hat. So if you are just going about your regular day-to-day work, you would probably wear something like this linen cap. It's just a plain white linen, and it's very easy to wash if it does get dirty. And it makes sure your head is covered, but there is not the risk of wearing something like this. Very good. So now I'll get into, I also do have my shoes here. They are just plain black leather shoes with brass buckles, as was the fashion of the 18th century. Shoes could also be tied with a piece of string, not as shoelaces are now. There wouldn't be a whole row of holes. There would be a singular hole on each side that a piece of string would be tied through to make a knot in the front. And that was also not the fashionable way of doing things in the 18th century. That was more just functional if you couldn't afford fancy buckles, or if the straps going across the shoes broke, then you could just poke some holes in and use a piece of string. So going into options for more dressy clothing and things that you would wear if you were not just going about your work and if you wanted to look nicer, we of course have the breeches. These are the more commonly known leg wear of the 18th century. These particular ones are made of a blue wool, the same wool as the jacket I'm wearing. And they go down to the knee. They're much more fitted than the trousers, and they have many more buttons and buttonholes, so they are a bit trickier to make. And they definitely do have a much nicer appearance than the trousers, so they are preferred in the 18th century. Yes. At the knee, these particular ones fasten with a row of buttons, and then the knee band closes with another button. Frequently in the 18th century, the knee bands of breeches do close with very fancy buckles, so it really does depend on your social status and what you feel like spending on your clothing. Then here we have a waistcoat. This is the layer that a man would wear on top of his shirt to cover the front of it. This particular one is made of a heavy wool with some brass buttons. And this particular one is unlined. That is not a particular thing. They could be lined, they could be unlined. But it is a very heavy wool. It does go further down than the jacket that I am wearing. The pockets are further down, and it is a much more formal piece of clothing. And then here we have the coat. This is the primary outerwear for a man in the 18th century. It is very long. It goes not quite down to the knee, but not too far. This particular one is made of a striped cotton, which was not the most common in the 18th century, although it was around in New England. It is documented. But more common would be things like heavyweight wool, because we are in the Northeast, so there is a lot of cold weather. So wool would be much more common, and linen was much more easily available, so cotton would be in the minority, but it was still around. This particular one does have horn buttons, which are, once again, not the most common. You could have metal buttons, you could have fabric-covered buttons, but these ones are horn with a bit of brass for the thread to go through. The coats of this time period have generally a fold-over collar, which is known as a cape. Some earlier and later time periods, coats have a collar that stands up. In the 1770s, it is fashionable to have a folded-over collar. The cuffs on this coat are not functional. They are decorative. But some coats did have cuffs that could unbutton and fold down over the hands. And then we do have side pockets with flaps to hold whatever you might need to carry with you. And then, the fashionable headwear of the 18th century. This hat is commonly known in the 21st century as a tricorn hat. But in the 18th century, it was, that term had not been invented yet. This hat was known as a cocked hat. That is because the sides are turned, also known as cocked up. So these sorts of hats were very common. Another option for a hat in the 18th century is a round hat, where it's a much shorter brim and it just goes all the way around. And sometimes those might have a ribbon around the crown, some other sort of decoration, but this is one of the more common styles of hat. This particular one is made out of a wool felt, although a lot of more expensive ones would use different types of fur. There could be beaver fur hats. I know those were fairly common. But wool was definitely on the cheaper end. And this is also the style of hat that was used by a majority of military forces in the 18th century. Cocked hats, I believe, did begin as a military fashion, and there were specific military styles of hat. A lot of the time in military service, these hats would have a bit of wool, white wool tape going all the way around the edge of the brim to sort of secure it from any deterioration around the edge. And then they might also have a cockade, which is a piece of, in the British Army, it was horsehair. It could be velvet, it could be something else, but some piece of fabric there with a button to sort of act as another bit of decoration that adds to the military appearance of the hat. So I can talk a bit more about the modifications that were made to clothing for the purpose of military service. So this coat is what we would call a frock coat, where it is generally a looser fitting coat that just you can put on over your waistcoat and go about your day. Military coats in the 1770s were generally made in a similar style, although they had a couple of additions that added to
in the room, which is the stays are always a very big question. I have a couple pairs. I have this pair here. This pair is actually the pair that fits me better, and I regret. Yeah, sure. Thanks, CJ. CJ's my Vanna White here. So I regret not having these on, but the problem is these stays lace in the back, and I was by myself. The stays I have on lace in the front. They don't fit as well. These fit much better. These are actually fully boned, so that means it's boned all the way. So I'm gonna pass these things around too. We're very interactive. I like people, you can touch and feel, etc. But what's nice about these stays too is they're unlined, so you don't normally get to see unlined stays. You can turn them around. And you can see the channels and just how intricate these are. I did not make these ones. I made the ones I'm wearing. These ones were made by Larkin and Smith, which is a pattern company. And they are 100% hand sewn. So all of the channels, etc. I also have, you'll notice this little teeny pair of stays. No, I was never this small. These are my daughter's. She has not worn them as of yet. But children did wear stays. So the idea was that you had good posture and you would even wear something like stays, even as a child from an infant. Really, it was more like swaddling. It was a little corset that would have what would be the equivalent of cardboard. So that would be laced up and babies would wear that and then be in their clothing and be swaddled. And boys would be in it as well. They would wear that and dresses up until about the age of 7, they would start to be breeched, maybe sometimes 6. Boys then would no longer have stays. Women, female children, would then continue with stays for the rest of their life. So with stays, it was more about the posture than it was about making the waist smaller. You actually wanted more of a cone shape. And by making the cone shape, if you make the hips look bigger, you then make the waist look smaller anyway. So in the 18th century, they were all about symmetry. So one of the big things when you think Georgian symmetry is a big term. They were very into balance. You get to the Victorian era, that was just, the sky's the limit. You get into asymmetry. But as far as in the Rococo period, things were very balanced as far as, you know, prints and woven and materials and embroidery.
Does that make sense?
So my stays, I have two different pairs. Of course, if you are a working class or a middling sort, I'm dressed in what they would call middling sort. If you were middling sort, you would mostly wear stays that usually laced either in the front or the front and the back, because you might not be able to have somebody available to lace you. But then when you get to, you know, upper middle, upper class, you would have stays that would lace in the back because you could afford to have somebody dress you. So embroidery, so you would have items like your pocket that would go underneath your clothing. And really your pocket was very, very important because that was where you kept all of your like money, personal belongings, etc. But you'll see here in the embroidery, the symmetry, okay? It's balanced one side to the other. This is a reproduction of a children's pocket from the Rhode Island Historical Society. I made it larger and I just did this. It was online, I just printed it and made the pattern and embroidered this before I had children. Now I have no time. So this is the shift. Basically, it's a very simple garment. In the 18th century, it wouldn't have had, during the Revolutionary War, you wouldn't have had these ties. That's not very accurate, it just makes it more adjustable. You would have actually had links that you would have, it would have been buttons. So like cufflinks, you would have had cufflinks. Also, there wouldn't have been a string in it. Again, this is an old one, my other one was being washed. So, I don't know if CJ talked to you about shirts and undergarments, but this is my son's little shirt that I made him. So I'll pass that around if you want to get an idea of the difference between that they would have, or a cover-up called a peignoir, which was basically, a nightgown, a fancy shirt that you wore over everything else to kind of keep your modesty. In addition to that, you could also, if you were wealthy, wear what's called a bedgown. So this could be worn as like a robe or a cover-up. It's a very simple garment with pleats in the back, folds in the front, crosses in the front. Now, you would wear your shift, and then there's something else. What else would you put on? What do you usually put on last that you might put on first in the 18th century? Any idea? You're gonna put in your socks, okay? And then you're gonna put on your shoes. The reason why, you're not gonna be able to bend over and buckle them after you put your stays on. It's gonna be challenging. So you would put your stockings on, and they did have pretty colored stockings too. You could have white, you could have colored, there were some striped stockings. They differed between men and women though, but these are called clocked stockings. And with clocked stockings, these are very fancy. They have a nice little pattern and they're pretty. So a lot of the time though, there would be a beautiful pattern, but it would be monotone. It would be the same color. So you might not notice it as much. These are just really fancy. And you may notice my beautiful blue shoes. Shoes were a variety of colors, blue, green. I have one in just about every color. And red was really popular as well. But the standard shoe were these black shoes here, okay? So this was pretty typical. Most of them buckled, but the nice thing about a buckle, if you had a buckle shoe, then if the buckles wore through, you could make it into a ribbon tie, like I have. So I do have some of the buckles as well. I'll pass those around if you would like to be able to see them. The nice thing about how they're made is you can just add a panel to them as your waistline expands, or if it contracts as well. And I've had to adjust stays very much. So I have about 4 pairs that some are kind of hacked up, but that's because I just never got around to remaking them. So you have your stays there. This just lace in the front. When they lace in the front, you have something called a stomacher. And this is also something you'll have on your gown too. Basically, it's a boned insert that you put in between. And while you lace it, because if you lace it, everything will just kind of get squished in the laces if there's nothing to hold it up. So that's why you have what's called a stomacher. So this is also a part of a dress too. So the two terms are different for different garments, but it's the same thing, essentially. Stays lace in a crisscross, whereas corsets lace like a shoelace. So that's the big difference. Now, as far as we covered shift, we covered stays, and then when we get to pockets, which I talked about my pocket earlier, you can have, I do have a plain pocket here somewhere, but it's missing. But you can, basically what happens with your pocket, you can put the shift down. Thank you, CJ. What you do with your pocket is you take the pocket, you can find the opening in your dress, you find which side. You have openings in your petticoat, and they're called pocket slits. And so what you do is you put your pocket in your pocket slit. You usually do this after you get, like, once you get your stays on, you're gonna put your pocket on. So, basically you wanted to put multiple layers over your pocket, because if you don't, your pocket can be taken. People can untie the string, or you could be pickpocketed, or they could cut the strings and then take your pocket and all your possessions, which was very common in the 18th century. It was a common crime. So you can see, basically, if I do forget to put my pocket on, I can just lift up my dress. Sometimes dresses have pocket slits as well. I'm too lazy and put them in. So what I do though is I just put it in my to make it accessible now, so I can hide my cell phone. I actually put it in one layer. So I just put it in one petticoat and then tie it. So that way my cell phone doesn't fall all the way through, which I've had before and had to locate it with Find My Phone. So basically, now in the 18th century, pockets could be smaller, they could be bigger. Even little girls had pockets. My daughter has a cute little pair, but it's a double pair because she likes to put a lot of rocks in her pocket. So you're gonna wanna put your petticoats on. Now, petticoats were interchangeable depending on basically weather, climate, things like that. How many petticoats would you wear? Usually 2 is the standard. I have found documentation that some people would wear, depending on how cold it was, 5. In addition to that, you could wear a quilted petticoat. Quilted petticoats were very popular. Oh, thank you, CJ. You're the best. Quilted petticoats were very popular. So, because they were decorative, they showed your skill as far as stitching was concerned. But in addition to that, they also kept you warm and they were versatile. So they also created a fullness on the gowns that was very fashionable during the Georgian era. I unfortunately have not attempted to make quilted petticoats. I have, as a conservator, examined many, and I've actually examined quilts that have quilted petticoats that have then been made into quilts. So once they wear them out, they spread them out and actually make them into bed coverings. They really utilize everything. So really, when you're a reenactor, one of the things you like really worn, beaten up stuff, because most people who are in living history or reenactors are too clean. Like, I don't mean their bodies should be clean, because hygiene was still important, but their clothing, you want it to look worn. You want it to look like you were wearing this every day. So basically, that a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to distress things, but buying secondhand is actually a pretty good market. It was even a big market in the 18th century. So you could buy things and resell them. That's why a lot of self-emancipated individuals would, or enslaved enslaved people who self-emancipated would actually, a lot of items, you hear that they're wearing several petticoats or that they may have had some kind of item because you basically took what you could, as much as you could, because you could sell it or trade it, etc. And it was all you could carry, really, because you're carrying all the stuff on your own. And when I'm carrying this stuff, I am carrying it on my own. So I have bags and different things I'm using to carry it in. And it can get really heavy depending on what your wardrobe is. We know what people had from inventories. So, even your clothing was listed. In the 18th century, the fabric was worth more than the labor. Now the labor is more than the fabric. So because all of the fabrics were custom, like if you had a very fancy fabric, they were likely woven in France or in England, and your laces come from Ireland. But believe it or not, in the 18th century, a lot of the flax that was made into Irish linens and lace came from here. So it came from New England, Rhode Island, Aquidneck Island in particular. So, basically we have our pocket. You're gonna put your petticoats on. I have 2 petticoats because I do like the fullness. Standard white petticoat is very common. I didn't bring an extra petticoat, unfortunately. Now, if you don't have a gown, gowns are very common part of dress, but we do also have evidence of people wearing what we call bed gowns, bed jackets, and that is this simple garment that you see here. Basically, it folds across the front, and I know this is everybody's question. How do you close it? Well, pins. That's why pins are so important and why Abigail Adams was so famous for talking about pins. So, and in her letters to her husband, they needed pins because of the fact that they literally closed your garments and preserved your modesty. So the big problem I had was pinning myself. So I have on myself, I have what's called a stomacher. This is a gown, and I have 2 petticoats on underneath. So that meant I had to get my stomacher on, so I pin it onto my stays. Then I have to put my gown on, and in putting my gown on, I have to adjust it to fit properly, and while holding the stays while holding the stomacher in place. And then there's another piece called robings, and you can see the hole through here. That's because those are robings. So if you need a little wiggle room, what happens is you pin yourself, your stomacher gives you a little extra space, and the robings come over here to cover so you don't have any gaps in your clothing from the pins. It's a very complicated system. It is a pain. That's the only part that's really quite a challenge aside from the stays. And we're always losing pins as reenactors. So when you ask someone for a pin, they'll be like, I'll just give you a regular pin, is that okay? Because our reproduction pins are very hard to come by. And they're very large too. So I do go through my stays sometimes, and I have poked myself, which is not fun.
Are they like safety pins or straight?
They're straight pins. Straight pins. Let me see if I got one. I got one somewhere that I can take off. I might have a big one somewhere. Can't find it. But regardless, they are very large. The other thing I forgot that you want to do before you, like also when you're getting your shoes on, etc., is your hair. Okay? Because hair is very important. You want to have it up out of your face, a cap on, you want covering, because that was what was considered, it was considered hygienic, but it was also fashionable and appropriate. So in the 18th century, don't believe Outlander, any of those movies, they don't have their long flowing hair out. That's not a thing. You wore at least a cap. So here I have my cap on. And this is my hair, but it doesn't mean I don't have enhancements. I have a donut basically in here, and then you pull your hair over the donut and you use U-shaped pins. So they call them Amish pins. They weren't like bobby pins. You use U-shaped pins to secure it onto this donut here. So I'll take one of these out and you're gonna think it's pretty impressive. So, because my other big thing is hair. I'm very interested in hair and cosmetics, and you may have seen me when I came in after I was done, I was putting something on my face. It's actually rouge and lip stain, which was popular in the 18th century. So you can see my pin. It's a big honking pin. They usually aren't this big. I prefer them this big for the higher hairstyles because I really want to anchor them in when I'm doing my talks. But they could range from very small to this size or maybe even larger. So we know this from illustrations. Dennis Diderot was an artist, an 18th century artist who he basically did the encyclopedia of trades and careers. And so we know so much about 18th century careers, trades, what they wore based on Dennis Diderot's illustration. We even know the tools that they used. So basically, you have your hair done, you have your cap on. Then you're gonna fasten your gown, which you see here, and then you need something else. You can't just go without your bosom concealed. So you would need what they call a kerchief or modesty piece, okay? I've heard some people say fichu. If you're French, you use fichu. If you're English, which the colonies were here, you would refer to it as a kerchief. So here you see my kerchief really doesn't cover very much. It's a very fine silk. But if you were of working class, you would definitely want to cover yourself, especially if you were working in the fields or out on the street because you didn't have sunscreen. So printed cottons were very popular, whether you were of working class or whether you were of upper class. So you see my printed cotton here, very fashionable. So you could have very good quality and you could have very inferior quality, just like you have knockoffs today. So this is a printed cotton. They were called Indians, and they were imported from usually India, but you could also get block prints that would come from Belgium, from France. So there were a lot of prints that were going on. And then eventually, as you get into the later 18th century, you have Samuel Slater, who is like, why are we not self-sustaining? People are paying big bucks for these cotton prints. Why aren't we making them here in Rhode Island? We have all the products and we can do it. So that's where Samuel Slater made all his money. So I have my gown, have my kerchief, have my cap, hair's all done. You would think I'm ready to go. But if I'm gonna go outside and it's cold in New England, you have to have the right attire. And we were talking about cloaks before. Also, you can't only just have a cap. You would need to have a hat. So if it's sunny, you want a wider brimmed hat because it actually would protect you from the sun. But it's also fashionable. I'm gonna have CJ hold this while I show you how a hat was put on. I have 3 versions of hats. So this is very much middling sort. Working classes and lower classes could wear these as well. It doesn't have as much of a brim though, so keep that in mind. And then we have this very fancy bergeret, is what they would call it. It's a reproduction from one that's in the LA County Museum. I made this, I don't know, 30 years ago in Colonial Williamsburg when I worked there. And it's made out of silk net and cut paper flowers. So I had to hand cut each one of those. So this is your very fancy hat that you could wear if you're a woman of the upper classes. But I'll show you how the hat works. If you have this big hair, a lot of people depict it that the ribbons are down here. That's not how it went. Basically what happened is your big hair pushes the hat forward. So it looks like the ribbons are pulling the hat down over your face. It really isn't. The ribbons are actually sewn inside. So basically, what I do is I put my hat, it would normally be very low on your face. I'd tie it in the back without trying to get my hair caught in it, which I do frequently. And you really want to pull tight because you don't want the wind to blow it off. Okay? So I'd want to cover my face. I'd want to keep myself protected from the sun as much as possible. I'd also want to cover my décolletage. So this is a very fashionable black straw hat, chip hat they would call it. And then you have your fancier hats here. So once I have my hat on, so you would mostly wear that for the summer. We also have, I forgot to bring it, there is a brown bonnet, a black bonnet, or a silk bonnet. They can be in a multitude of colors. Black was very common, but it basically looks like an 18th century baseball cap. And those are one of my favorites because it has brim, it covers you, but it also, when the wind blows, it doesn't blow it off your head. So if I were gonna go out, I would then want, and it's cold outside, I would want to put my cloak on. Let's see if I can get this on. And cloaks did have hooks. I don't know, did men's have buttons?
I think it depends.
Yeah, we don't really have buttons, but a hook would be important because they can get very heavy. You can see where this one's wool. And so hoods were very different in the 18th century. And you'll see why. I'm going to take my hat off because it's hard to have my hood on and the hat. And I'm going to tell you a solution to that. So I'm going to put my hood up and you can see how it is in the back. Do you see how, sorry, I can get it. Do you see how it's kind of ruched in the back here, all scrunched up? You see that? You're going to see it better in just a second. So that's the difference between just a regular cloak, or a burnous as they would call it, and an 18th century cloak. Now, there's one other way you could, if you can't go big, you got to go home. So if you had a big hairstyle like this and you wanted to protect it from the elements, because it cost a lot of money to get it styled. And sometimes women were even getting them styled every 3 days. You didn't wash your hair as much, but you used dry shampoo, which is powder, and you used a leave-in conditioner, which was your pomade, and pomade was waxy. So you would leave that in your hair, and then you'd have your hair restyled. Now, why would they need to restyle it? Because you'd have extensions, basically, in your hair. Women didn't necessarily wear wigs. Rarely did they wear wigs. Only wore wigs if they had some kind of, if they were losing hair or had some kind of health issue. So women instead would have their hair styled by a hairdresser or groove maker, wig maker, and they could come directly to your residence and do it at home. So women would have their hair styled, but it was very, very expensive, and you could add pieces to it. You could add wool roving, you could add yak hair, horse hair, a lot of different hairs, but in addition to that, you could, if you were blonde, they would use the remnants of flax, which is referred to as tow, and that's where the term tow head came from. So now, if I really want to protect my hair, I have a lot of money, I want to show it off too. So hold on one second. This was a style that's more common in the 1780s, so a little later, but this is my new purchase, and I'm so excited. It's called a calash, and I'm going to show you how it works. So, but wait, I'm going to turn around so you don't see it. Is it fabulous or what? I'm so girly. I always wanted one of these. So you can see it's like a hood, right? Wait, until you see this. Look at that. So on a windy day, it's like a convertible. What do you think? Yeah? Like it? Like I said, if you can't go big, you gotta go home. So this would protect your hair from the elements. And it's I will tell you, it's very cozy. As soon as I put it on, I noticed, I was like, wow, I should wear this at home. It muffles out the noise. So, but I can pass this around too. You can take a look at it. And you'll also see a close-up of the hood that I have, the style of hood that I have also on my cloak. Pass that around. Well, accessorized woman. I don't have any mitts. You would have mitts. Mitts would usually be fingerless. Sometimes they would be knit wool and have fingers, but they'd be only half fingers because you were constantly trying to work with your hands. So I do have some fancier gowns that I can show you the difference and show you some of the pieces. You want to hold it? You hold it. CJ can hold it. Isn't it pretty? So this is what's called a French gown. They would have called it in France, robe à la française, but in the colonies we called it French. So the difference between a French gown and an English gown is if CJ turns it around, do you see these pleats? This is what's called a watua back or a sack back. Watua was an artist who was famous for painting women like this, so that's why in these gowns and the backs of them, so that's why it's named that, but actually it would have been called a sack. It would have been referred to as a sack. So these are long, luxurious pleats. As you get later in the 18th century, this becomes less and less popular, and all women would do, because the fabric was so expensive, was stitch the pleats down and then turn it into an English gown or what they would call an Italian nightgown. I'm going to show you my gown so you see what an English gown looks like in the back and the difference. So you can see in the back here, my pleats are down, and they're stitched all the way down. This gown though, you'll notice, all one piece, okay? One piece, you cut into the piece, that's the term mantua, so it means robe. So with the mantua, it was one piece in the back, you would add the sides, okay? Then add your stomacher, and this would be cut in and pleated, so it looked like it had a separate skirt, but it didn't originally in the 18th century. You'd have these long pleats. As I see gowns later, I actually see fabrics as early as, 1750s, but they're gowns that I know were made in the 1780s or remade in the 1780s because they have what's called a closed front with no stomacher. So they just go butt to butt. And in addition to that, this gets cut in, and then eventually the skirt and bodice becomes separate when you get into the 19th century. So this fringe here is called fly fringe, and it's all done by hand. It's silk, and basically it's just like making a fly. You take silk yarns and you just I use a toothbrush, but you use little brushes and you can make the flies. And each one of these is a different fly, and you could cover your whole gown. Sometimes gowns are just draped and covered in it, especially if you're a woman in Europe of upper classes. So, put that down. I also have another undergarment I didn't put on because I have big enough hips, are pocket hoops. So these are, I'll let you hold them. They go around your waist. They look just like the pockets. They are kind of like accordions, and they go on each side and make your dress look fuller. As you get to the 1780s, you have what's called a bum roll. We don't see a bum roll till 1780s, and that puts more in the back. The emphasis in the later Georgian period goes from the sides to the back. Now, if in the 18th century, you're familiar with Marie Antoinette, if you had a fancier gown, you're a woman of status and really wanted to show your grand gown, you would have what's called a grand panier. A grand panier isn't a single pocket. It's not two pockets, it's a singular piece, but again, balance and symmetry. It's kind of accordion, so people ask how you sit down, well, it moves with you. So it's not, you can sit down, it's like an accordion. They thought of everything when they made this. They wanted it to be practical and functional, even though it took forever to get dressed. So, grand panier. Now, I think that about covers everything. I do have also some children's garments I can pass around to you. This is my daughter's little dress. Doesn't fit her anymore. But you'll notice there's some straps on here. These are called leading straps. So if to keep your child from running away, which I have had to use them when she was younger, you would have these on the shoulders. Eventually, these would become robings and go down in front. So I'll let you take a look at covered everything, right? As far as cosmetics, hygiene, just because they didn't bathe as much doesn't mean they weren't hygienic. They had whole volumes on hygiene and how they would spend a lot on perfumes. They would bathe. They just wouldn't do a full immersion bath, okay? And like I said, when it came to hair, you would use dry shampoo and leave-in conditioner. And actually, once you wash your hair, it's so very, very soft after. So I don't wash my hair. I maybe wash my hair once a week. So, because I have curly hair now. I didn't always have curly hair for some reason. But I have it now, so I wash my hair once a week, and I use a dry shampoo and a leave-in conditioner as well. So I have some little, there is a company where she does reproduction, 18th century beauty products, as well as she does 19th century. It's called Little Bits Cosmetic Company, and she does have powders as well. And she has powders in a multitude of colors, because in the 18th century they did. You could get it in pink, you could get it in blue, you could get it in orange, you can get it in red. Basically, a multitude of colors. White was very popular. In New England, we don't see a lot of powder. It doesn't mean they didn't use it. It just might mean they brushed it out, or they used darker powder. So the idea was to wear things like makeup. They call this paint for the face. Wear it, but make it look like it was natural. So a lot of people say, oh, they didn't have makeup, they wouldn't spend the money. Well, if they had it, they would. But they would just put it in different places. The cheeks would be rosy up here, your lips might be, it would be subtle. And for the eyebrows, dark eyebrows were very popular. And what they do is they burn the end of a clove and it would char, and then they would put it on their eyebrow and just darken it very gently. So there are some naysayers who say that we don't have powders in the 18th century, but I actually have depictions of Boston women, young women in the 18th century with pink hair. So I do have illustrations that I found with that. So not necessarily true. And if you go to look at any Copley portrait, some of the women are in there, their hair is very raven and dark and lovely, because that was a very popular tone. Not a single gray hair in the painting. Was that artistic license, or did they use a powder? Because originally, powder started in the 17th century when the king wanted to cover up his gray hairs, so he had brown powder. So it doesn't mean that they didn't have gray hair. They could have been using a darker powder. So, something to think about. So, I think that's it. Any questions? Yes?
When did women start wearing bras instead of pushing up?
Well, they found examples of bras. People like to shove things in cavities and walls once they got destroyed. It was kind of a good luck thing. And even in the medieval era, they had bras. So you do start seeing bras, but They kind of become popular at a certain time, then they die off. And it becomes more rigid. Now, you really don't start seeing the brassiere until you get to the 1920s. So that's really when you see the introduction of that. You can even see it, I think, in the teens as well, something like it. It's more like a camisole or a fitted top garment. But in the 1920s, really, that's when you start seeing binding garments and bras. So, and from there, it takes off.
I know it's 100 years later, but that scene in Gone with the Wind,
Mm-hmm.
Abby is tying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate? That
There are extremes in any time period, any culture, any society. We still have those extremes today. Was that day to day? No. And there's this idea that they got rid of ribs, things like that. I found zero documentation of that. What they did do is Photoshop your pictures. So when you had a picture and you have this beautiful waist, artists would color in parts of the photograph to make your waist look smaller. So when you're seeing that in the 19th and in the early 20th century, you're likely seeing their version of Photoshop. So did they have tight lacing? Yeah, people would wear tight lacing. It depended on your status as well, if you could do that. A lot of women were very active in the 19th century. This is when sportswear becomes popular. Even in the 18th century, you start seeing things like riding habits. Women become more active. They're riding, they're playing sports, they're bowling, they're going for long walks. So women are very involved in sports. And so if you are going to participate in those things, you don't necessarily want to do the extremes, but let's think about it. Women were climbing Mount Washington in high heels and corsets. So does that mean they couldn't, it was uncomfortable? I would say not too uncomfortable, but let's think of men climbing these things who have fallen. You have women in high heels and in corsets that are climbing those